This video is for all of you people who are in support of deporting 10 million foreigners, illegal immigrants. My children are dual nationals. They were born in Indonesia. Their mother was an Indonesian, and obviously I'm an American. Well, it should be obvious, although I've met foreigners who speak like they're from America. After my wife died, we had to flee to this country so I could protect my children from my wife's family. But that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is my children, by right of birth to an American national, an American-born citizen with roots going back all the way to one of the first colonies, well, they're Americans, aren't they? But now my children are scared. They're scared that they're going to be deported back to Indonesia. And you say, well, that's not going to happen. They were born to an American man. Well, here's the problem. Number one, Trump has, over and over again, displayed a great deal of willingness to treat whites better than blacks and Hispanics primarily. He has targeted specific groups. He accuses everybody fleeing across the border from Mexico of being from prisons and insane asylums. But that's not the truth. He says these things to scare you. He's a fearmonger. He uses fear against you. Now, I know you're not going to believe me. And you go ahead and keep your head in the sand. But think about this. I had a neighbor once from Durango, Mexico. He fled to this country however long ago because of the cartels. He came to America to escape the persecution, the threat of persecution, the threat of murder at the hands of the cartels. And I asked him about this. He gave me several examples. He said, if the cartel comes to you and says, we need you to go do this work for us over in that place way over there, we will pay you, and when you're done, you come home. If you say yes, that's exactly what happens. If you say no, they will kill you, they will kill your spouse, they will kill your parents, they will kill your children, maybe your friends and neighbors too. As an example to show why you cannot say no to the cartels. And if, by chance, you try to stand up to the cartels, well, it's easily that bad, if not worse. Do you know why the cartels have so much power? It's because of America. Number one, the war on drugs has escalated the amount of violence they're willing to commit. Number two, America is the number one consumer of illegal drugs. We are fueling the drug lords that our government is supposedly fighting through the war on drugs, which, by the way, is an epic failure. And will never succeed. Because you cannot win in a war where you are feeding the enemy. That's just the first part of it. So, setting aside the fact that the reason that Mexicans and Venezuelans and a lot of other people from other countries are running to America is because America is the number one destination to sell drugs, because Americans are just drug crazy, apparently. I'm not. I don't do drugs. Maybe I should. Maybe I should help those cartels like all the rest of you drug users and drug dealers. Sounds like a great plan. Undermine America from inside. Nah. I don't really feel good about that. As much as I criticize America, I don't want to become part of the problem. You druggies go ahead and do your thing. I understand some of you are addicts, and in your case, I forgive you. But the rest of you who are not addicts, you are traitors. So shut your mouth when you talk about getting rid of the illegal immigrants. But you're going to say to me, but Glenn, this isn't a problem for your children. They're not illegal immigrants. They came here legally with a passport and everything. And that is true. However, throughout American history, we have seen examples of enslavement. We've seen examples of discrimination. If we go back into history, when the Irish, escaping the famine, the potato famine, for those of you who haven't heard of it, there was a big famine because potatoes were a major food for the Irish, and a lot of their other food was being exported per force because of the royals and Parliament to the UK, or the rest of the UK, I should say. When the fungus hit the potatoes and wiped out them, so many Irish died. And it wasn't just because of the potato famine. It was because of Britain being unwilling to help Ireland. They treated them very punitively. So if you look at the history between Ireland and Britain, it has not been good. So there is some justification for the animosity and the IRA and stuff. Lots of justification, actually. Anyway, so a lot of Irish fled to America. Some of them became criminals. And then when new Irish people came in, they would prey on those people. They'd say, hey, welcome, brothers and sisters from Ireland. I'm going to help you. I'm going to take you to a nice place where you can get a good meal every day and you have a place to live and stuff like that. And they would take them to these slums, these horrible ghettos where there was lots of violence and gangs, of which they were part of. And they would rob them and put them into these horrible conditions. And then the Irish were treated, because they were Catholic, they were treated extremely poorly. So in order to fight back to get a fair shake in the country, they became the mob. And they took over politics. Now, you may say, well, that's not true. Well, look at the history of the Kennedys and go back into history and look at Tammany Hall and all this other stuff. There are books written about the Irish mob. And then there's the Chinese. The Chinese started being kidnapped from Shanghai, for most famously, but also from other parts of China. And I think it was with the help of Chinese people often who wanted money and they didn't care about their fellow citizens. But they were brought here basically as slaves. They worked on the railroads. And they couldn't speak English, so they couldn't ask for help. They couldn't run away because they didn't know where to go. And they couldn't speak English to ask for help. And life was horrible for them. They were treated easily, you could say not as bad perhaps as the African Americans, but pretty darn close, as were the Irish. Were the Irish illegal immigrants? No. Were the Chinese? Yes, but that wasn't their choice. They were kidnapped. And so instead of being rescued by all these good Christians that dominated the country at the time, They were persecuted. They were treated as if they were heathens because they couldn't speak English and they didn't dress the same and their hair looked different and their eyes looked different and their skin color was different. So, of course, Christians, being ignorant of what Jesus taught, often, not always, there were good Christians, often behaved as bad Christians and did bad things and reveled in it. And then we could talk about the African Americans who were enslaved for hundreds of years. And initially it started out as a standard enslavement or sometimes even an indentured servitude. But eventually the slave owners, becoming more and more dependent on slave labor as a cheaper way to get their things done on their plantations, decided, well, let's institutionalize this. Let's make this a moral issue. Let's make this a legal issue. And so they changed laws and they changed Christian perception of black people to make them look like they were not human. And sociologists were involved in this. Black people were brought from Africa with the promises of being able to meet Americans and teach them about their cultures, and they were paraded around as circus freaks and treated poorly. And those were the free Africans. And some of them ended up being enslaved or otherwise mistreated. And the history of America and how it treated the Africans and the Native Americans, which is even worse in some ways. It's embarrassing, and any American who says that there's something wrong with blacks or Hispanics or Asians or Native Americans is not an American, because this is the land of the free. It's not free just for you white folk with your racist notions and your fear of everything that's different, you knuckle-headed, misogynistic jerk-offs. Oh, God. But you're saying, well, that's ancient history. Come on, Glenn. This is the modern age. Yes, we've got a president who repeatedly railed against the Mexicans, called them dangerous, talked about how they're bringing drugs into the country, when 90% of the people who are stopped for drug muling are American citizens, white people. 90%. Yeah. So why don't you deport all of these Americans who are importing illegally all the drugs? Oh, I'm sorry, they're white. We can't do that. That wouldn't be fair. But that's different. That's different, you say. Okay, how about World War II? During World War II, Germany, Italy, Russia, and Japan, well, Germany, Italy, and Japan had a tripact where they were involved in taking control of Eastern Asia and then Europe for Italy and Germany and so on. And there was a non-aggression pact between Russia and Germany, but not between Russia and Japan, because Japan absolutely hated Russia because of long-standing problems between the two countries. And they wanted northern China in order to be able to use it as a buffer against Russia. Of course, the Japanese were still rooted in that shogun culture. The samurai culture was an extremely violent and horrible culture of destruction and false harmony, where the peasants were subjugated by the daimyo and the shoguns and the samurai, and in some places it was a horrible existence. And when they started invading other countries, like they invaded Korea and China and Singapore and Hong Kong and Indonesia and other places, they behaved like monsters, raping women, hoisting people on a spear, even children, murdering, horrible, horrible things. They would take women and use them as sex slaves, being raped over and over and over again by soldiers day after day after day. Anybody who surrendered to the Japanese was treated as pathetic losers with no value. So they would be happy to kill them off. And it didn't matter, because in the Japanese mind, if you surrendered, you had no honor. But anyways, I digress. So, the Nazis were doing horrible things to us and to Europeans. I don't know about the Italians, because the Italians have been overlooked a lot when it comes to history. But the Italians were fascist, and the Germans were Nazis, which are not the same thing, by the way. Did the Italians commit atrocities? Yes. Yes, they did. But there is precious little in the media about that. There aren't very many movies about what the Italians did. But yes, they did. Then again, the Americans committed atrocities. We already know about the Russians. Stalin was a lunatic, and he murdered millions of his own people. Just like Mao. But the Germans, it seemed like they were in competition with the Japanese to see who could kill more people. And the Americans firebombed German civilian locations and used atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to force, in both cases, to force those countries to submit. But they made it very difficult for those countries to want to, because they wanted unconditional surrender. And Germany, having already been screwed over after World War I in a very, very bad way, that was bankrupting their country and making it very horrible to be there for many Germans, resisted because they didn't want that to happen again. And Japan was very proud and full of honor, and they didn't want to do that either. But ultimately, the illegal firebombing of cities in Germany and in Japan, and then the atomic bomb in Japan, because Germany had fallen, they avoided the atomic bomb, resulted in the Allies defeating the Axis. But that's not the proof that I'm trying to give you. The proof is that during World War II, America decided it needed to get rid of spies. Did they round up all the Germans and Italians? No. Maybe it was just too hard to tell who was a German or an Italian, Oh, you're eating schnitzel? Are you German? Oh, no. No, mynheer. I'm not a German at all. Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to do a German accent, but I couldn't pull it off, so I just abandoned the idea. And Italians eat pasta, but hey, you're eating pasta, hey? Oh yeah, I'm Chinese, because pasta originated in China, not in Italy. So what did they do? They decided it was too hard to find the Germans and the Italians who were reporting back to Germany and Italy. So instead, they targeted the Japanese. Unfortunately, everybody with slant eyes looks the same. So what did they do? They rounded up anybody that looked even remotely Chinese. Now, granted, in Japan, I'm sorry, not Chinese, Japanese. Granted, in Japan, there are multiple ethnicities that originate from the Japanese islands. Japanese don't all look the same. So if you're thinking of Chekhov, for example, from Star Trek, for you older people, no. That's just, he is only one example of what a Japanese person might look like. So they rounded up all the Japanese, and then they also rounded up some other Asians that they thought were Japanese. They imprisoned them all. These people had been tormented by neighbors prior to that because of Japan. And when they got out of these concentration camps after the war, they were still tormented by their neighbors. And it was a very, very hard time for them, and left scars on these families who had been, in some cases, been active in the military, helping the American military against Japan or Germany and Italy. And were very, very staunch Americans. Now, were there bad Asians that got caught? Oh, I'm sure there were. It's inevitable that you round up 1 million people or whatever, and you're going to catch some fish, right? Right? But still, rounding up 1 million people to catch a small number of people, putting them all in prison and treating them poorly is not a good recipe. It's like when Bush started bombing Afghanistan to catch Osama bin Laden. You don't bomb a country to catch a man. That's like going to the Great Salt Lake in Utah and trying to fish. You're highly unlikely to catch anything. Yeah. But, that was their way of trying to subjugate Afghanistan. Because, Afghanistan's got oil, and America has always been very interested in invading countries and attacking countries that have oil or can have a pipeline built through it for oil. Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Vietnam, a lot of other countries were motivated by the acquisition of wealth, power, resources, especially oil. America has been empire building since, for most of its existence. It's just more of a covert empire using economic force and military force and assassinations and coups and things like that to maintain dominance. And it doesn't like being threatened by China. But that's beside the point. The point here is that America singled out just Asians and took them en masse from their homes to concentration camps, mostly in Western America. But you're going to say, well, that was like 1 billion years ago, Glenn. Come on. Okay. If that's not good for you, September 11th, it was announced that it was those darned Muslims. Now, notice this entire time, one of the main sources of funding for those darn terrorists was Saudi Arabia. And yet we've never done anything about that. When a famous journalist who had been persecuted by the Saudis came to America and was revealing all kinds of things about Saudi Arabia, he had to go to a Saudi embassy in order to get married to his next wife, and they murdered him and chopped him up in the embassy, and America did nothing about it. Absolutely nothing. And repeatedly, I've heard in the news, Saudi-backed terrorists. Saudi-backed terrorists. But we don't do anything to Saudi people. We don't do anything to the royals. And this is true of every propped up government that cooperates with America. Every nasty dictator that cooperates with America. America leaves them alone, even though they are the antithesis of what America supposedly represents, that morality of freedom and bravery and democracy and all that stuff. But America repeatedly props up dictators and leaves alone human rights violators who cooperate with America. Now, if you don't want to cooperate with America, just because it's not going to benefit you quite so much as you would like it to, well, tough. America is going to tear you down and replace you with somebody who will. Like, what happened with Central America with all the banana republics that were made by America using the CIA, sometimes the military, to overthrow legitimate leaders and put in place horrible dictators. Horrible, horrible, horrible. Why? Because the investors wanted it that way. And in one case, the investor happened to be one of the top people in the current in that administration of the government in America. Yep. The owner of the banana company, whose name I always forget, called up this guy and said, "Hey, just want to let you know, if we can't do something about the government of this country that I'm getting all these bananas from, it's going to hurt your stocks." And so what did this guy do? He sent the CIA in. They overthrew the government, replaced it with a dictatorship, and when the people there tried to overthrow it, they murdered so many people between the dominating force in that country that was corrupt and the CIA. Woo, man, I would hate to be in any country where America has a financial interest and that country isn't willing to just bend over and say, "Here, give it to me, baby." Because that's what America does. So, that this whole idea of America being moral, no. And this idea of America being the land of God, if that is God's will, that these countries be tortured, that the government be replaced with dictatorships who are cruel, tyrannical, violent, then no, this is not the land of God. This is the land of demons. You people are so ignorant. Anyways, so after September 11th, people being angry about 911, which is justified, okay? Very justified. I mean, despite the fact that America knew it was going to happen, just like they knew that Pearl Harbor was going to happen. It was justified that we were all upset. I was horribly upset. I had to stop looking at I was living with a friend. I had to ask, please don't have the TV on when I'm home because it's depressing me. I wouldn't listen to the radio anymore because it was constantly news about what had happened. I had seen the video. I'd woken up to it, and I thought it was a movie on a cable channel, and I went back to bed, and I woke up again, and I tried to go to work. Work was saying nobody has to come in. We understand. But if you want to come in, you can. So I tried to go in to distract myself, and boy, oh boy, I couldn't listen to the radio. I couldn't watch TV because it was just this bombardment of our psyches with what had happened in order to rile us up to make us want to attack Iraq and Afghanistan and whoever else was in the way. And pass the Patriot Act, which violated our rights as Americans. It's just people are so naive. You can't trust the American government. The American government doesn't care about you. It cares about what it wants. And what it wants is what the oligarchs and plutocrats want. The ruling class defines what the government has for its agenda. So, don't tell me that my children are not potentially going to be targeted as dual citizens because throughout American history we have persecuted everybody, especially people who are not white, but also like the Irish, the Native Americans, the blacks, the Irish, the Chinese, the Japanese, and on and on and on and on. And we harbored German Nazis. Why? Because they were intelligent and they had knowledge that was going to help us. So they got away with war crimes. And in some cases, America lied about the war crimes. And this is not just Germans, by the way. It was also Italians and even Japanese. They were protected during the Nuremberg trials. They were protected during the trials for the Japanese. Their activities in genocidal behavior and torture, vivisections, and other experiments on people were hidden from the court, violating international law. That's what America does, violates international law whenever it suits it. And they got off scot-free. They lived out their lives while all the victims cried from their graves for justice. And America, the government, denied it because they wanted the information these people had, the knowledge, the skills. So don't tell me that innocent immigrants deserve to be deported. And don't tell me that everybody crossing the border is a criminal. And don't tell me that everybody that's going to be deported is a criminal. Because those are all blanket statements, and a blanket statement is almost never true. Speaking as an ex-English teacher, I can guarantee you that you will never find that 100% of blanket statements are true. And in fact, the number that are true is far less. So if my children happen to be accidentally detained and with or without deportation, let's just think about one more thing. After September 11th, with Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib, was it? I forgot the name of the one over in the Middle East. After these black sites were opened where suspected terrorists were taken, oftentimes on false information provided by American citizens who were just trying to make somebody else's life horrible, with no rights under American law, even though they were American citizens, with no way to get a lawyer to help them get out, with no charges being announced to the family, with no communication with the outside world, and in many cases being tortured without sufficient evidence to show that they were actually terrorists. So if you were a Middle Easterner or a Muslim in America at that time, your life was seriously in danger. And many people were tortured. Some of them died. And some of them were guilty. The rest were not. Because that's what our American government does. It's like, all right, I want you to reach into this bag. Don't look, don't close your eyes. Reach into this bag and pull out 100 names. And those people we are going to persecute. Doesn't matter who they are. Hopefully they're not whites, though, because, whites are different. We're special. But pull out 100 names and give it to me. Give it to me. Come on. Don't look. Don't. Close your eyes. Close your eyes. Thank you. We will go and persecute these people. Did they do something wrong? Oh, don't worry about that. We're protecting you. So, if something happens to my children, which probably won't happen, or something happens to other people who are innocent, who are not illegal immigrants, or who do not deserve that treatment, it's on your heads. All of you people, including my family members, who supported this criminal that's our president now, all of you are culpable. All of you are guilty. This is not America, the land of God. We have a government that has been corrupt my entire life and since long before that. So don't get on your high horse with me. It isn't going to work. To everybody else who opposed the dictator we currently have as president, thank you. Have a good day.